So
Yeah.
maybe this would be a good time to transition into talking about Jim Carrey a little bit because we've kind of alluded to it. But Jim Carrey is another interesting character as a human being, but also particularly in the way that he played Andy Kaufman. In 1999, there was a biopic made of Andy Kaufman where Jim Carrey was playing him called Man on the Moon, and that's named after an REM song that was written about Andy Kaufman. So Jim Carrey played Andy Kaufman in this movie, and it wasn't so well known until recently. I think this came out a couple of years ago, where Netflix actually created a documentary with a lot of the behind the scenes footage of Jim Carrey playing Andy Kaufman. This one is called Jim and Andy: The Great Beyond. And so when Jim Carrey played Andy, Jim basically decided to just enter into like a full method acting Andy Kaufman, Tony Clifton trance for like the whole duration of the shoot. And he definitely interpreted Andy in his own way. Like you can see in the movie that he plays him a little bit differently. And he interacted with everybody from like his fellow actors to people on and off set to people at parties as this wild
Even
Andy Kaufman,
Andy's
Tony Clifton,
family.
yeah, Andy's family, Andy's girlfriend, uh, with everyone as his interpretation of Andy. And he did a very similar thing both on and off camera where he was playing with pissing people off and messing with reality and messing with identity. And Ariel, you were saying that you consider Jim Carrey's portrayal maybe a little bit more pathological than Andy's actual character was. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
That's not really what I was saying. I wasn't saying necessarily that Jim Carrey was more pathological. I just think that the psychology that Chris and Dan were describing, like someone who's desperate to connect and desperate to be liked and going on all these antics because they really want people to love them and to like them, it seems a lot more similar to Jim Carrey, especially like young Jim Carrey, than to Andy Kaufman. I think Andy Kaufman's on a completely different trip. Not necessarily a less pathological one, but different.
I think this is important because comedians talk about this, like Joe Rogan talks about this, and he mentioned it with a lot of comedians where they get into it because they're trying to be liked. Or Robin Williams is another example. He was really trying to please his stepmother. Like the only way that he found he could stop his stepmother being angry at him and treating him cruelly was to make her laugh. So he just turned into this dancing monkey. And a lot of comedians go on that path, and even artists in general. It's like they're trying to get acceptance, and then if they have a little self-actualization, at some point they turn and they say, I'm complete now. I'm a full person. I don't need I don't crave acceptance anymore, but I'm going to take this seriously as an art form. And I wonder, I mean, the way that Jim talks in the old footage, you can hear him talking about himself. Like as Tony Clifton, he says, I don't know about that Jim Carrey guy. He smiles too much. That's not natural and stuff like that. You can hear that he's talking about himself like a broken man. But now I'd say he's probably more complete.
I want to just read a Jim Carrey quote. This is something after he filmed Man on the Moon. He said, Jim Carrey was a great character, and I was lucky to get the part. This was when he was on Jimmy Kimmel a couple years ago. And he says, but I don't think of that as me anymore. So he says, Jim Carrey was a great character. I was lucky to get the part, but I don't think of that as me anymore. And I don't know how much that has to do just with him playing Andy Kaufman and messing with his concept of self for so long, or whether it was outside of that also. But I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, well, he has a couple of bits. One bit he did, he was talking about going to the dentist and having the laughing gas and having this psychedelic experience and sort of little ego death experience while high. And there's a few things like that he talks about.
Yeah, sorry, Jim Carrey mentioned that in the Jim and Andy documentary.
No, that was that's a separate bit that he did.
Yeah, there's been other things that he's done recently. Like I think it was maybe a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. There was kind of an infamous interview on E News. I don't know if you ever saw that, but it was a red carpet interview. The girl comes up to him and asks him about what he's wearing, and he starts talking about like, what am I wearing? Like, I don't even exist. None of this exists. None of this matters. And she's just left absolutely speechless. Like Jim Carrey is clearly in a different kind of place. He has another quote. He says, "I've stepped through the door. The door is the realization that this us is Seaside. It's the dumb. It's the dumb. This isn't real. This is a story." And like Seaside is the town that the Truman Show took place in, which the movie where basically he was a character living in a completely artificial constructed reality.
It's interesting because like Andy Kaufman seems to have, like, he says a similar thing in Man on the Moon. He says something like, none of this is real. And it seems to me that like that was kind of a premise to everything that he was doing. Like he didn't treat the people around him as real people. He didn't treat the world as real. He treated it like almost like a beautiful creation that he was contributing to.
I mean, so Jim Carrey said something like in Jim and Andy, he said, like, what is this? You come into this world and you're a citizen of a particular group of people, and you like your parents probably teach you about some God and some like religious beliefs, and you have all this stuff that just gets programmed into you, and like, is any of that actually part of who I am? Is any of that actually real? And well, in my opinion, some of that is real. Some of that traditional stuff that we pass down to our kids is there because it's useful. It does tell us something about ourselves. But on the other hand, I think Jim Carrey is right that we can't just accept everything that society tells us about ourselves and just be that. There is a process of sort of, I guess, becoming an adult or becoming who you are, where you take the best stuff of what you were taught, and then you kind of you synthesize that into a new version of you that you created.